You are now listening to the Protestant Libertarian Podcast. All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Protestant Libertarian Podcast. On the show today, I have Bill Schult. He is running for City Council of Crescent Springs, Kentucky. He is the person that introduced me to the Libertarian Party, and I'm very excited to have him on the show today. Bill, how you doing?
I'm doing great and very excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Alex.
Well, thank you. Hey, so tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, and your work.
Right. So, like you said, I'm Bill Schult. I am a resident of Crescent Springs, Kentucky, here in Kenton County, northern Kentucky. I am a Catholic. Hopefully not the first or last one on the podcast. I'm married to Lindsay. We've been married for just 10 years. We just had our anniversary. We have 4 kids from age 7.5 to 2 months. I was raised in Kenton County, and I've lived in Crescent Springs since 2015, although we're in our second house in the city. First, we lived in the neighborhood of Triple Lake, and now we're in the Crossings neighborhood.
Yeah, sure. All those 4 kids, you had to move up to
that's exactly
accommodate the children.
That's exactly right, and we're already running out of bedrooms, so it seems to never stop. And I'll briefly introduce too some of my work. So I like to say that I'm a recovering CPA. I about 7 years ago founded a senior care business called Trinity Aging Life Advisors. We help seniors and individuals with special needs with both financial and medical decisions and situations.
Cool. Well, tell me a little bit about your city, Crescent Springs, Kentucky, and then what made you want to run for office in your city.
Yeah, Crescent Springs is a city. It's really closely connected with the neighboring city, Villa Hills, Kentucky, with Villa Hills being the more residential, Crescent Springs being a little more business-oriented, but still primarily a retail, restaurant-type businesses. Town of about 4,000 people. By Northern Kentucky standards, a little bit diverse, but maybe less diverse than other parts of the country. But very safe, reasonably affordable, close to downtown Cincinnati, 10 or 12 minutes. And I've really, really enjoyed beginning to raise my family there. In terms of what made me want to run for office, about 7 months ago, there was an interim council opening. The mayor resigned, and one of the council members was elected to be the new mayor. So they needed a new council member for the balance of the year. And it never really crossed my mind to be interested in that. But I actually had 5 or 6 different people reach out to me and say, oh, I know you're politically oriented. Are you going to go for the interim city council position? And it was interesting, the demographics of the people that asked me. There was one person who had moved away from the city but still followed city affairs. There was somebody I know was a Democrat. There were a few Republicans and one independent, one Libertarian as well. And all different ages as well. One of the people was in their 20s and one of their people was in their 90s. She actually was the former mayor. So I expressed some interest in running. I threw my name in the hat. The way the interim selection works is the current council selects the new member. And that was an interesting experience. And I want to caveat by saying, or preface it by saying, I didn't expect to be selected. I had not been an active attendee at the meetings. I had certainly followed along on Facebook for many of them, but they didn't know who I was. But what was interesting about it was 5 of us got there. 5 of us gave our little 1-minute speech in front of the council. And as soon as the 5th speech was done, the person running the meeting, who's one of the council members, immediately said, okay, do we have any nominations? A nomination was made. It was quickly seconded. Then the person leading the meeting, the council member, said, okay, any other nominations? Very quickly said, no, none. Okay, let's all vote to approve this person. And very quickly she was voted in. So again, not that I expected to be voted in, but you could tell these sort of things were coordinated in advance and spoken about in advance. And as a libertarian, as an independent type person, that rubbed me the wrong way a little bit. So in addition to the fact that as I said, I'm politically oriented, it made me get interested in running.
Yeah. So as we were talking about before the show, every city is very different. And so depending on the size of the city and, like you said, the makeup, the residential to commercial ratio of the city, like the role of city council is a lot different depending on where you live. And I think a lot of people feel disconnected from city council for that reason. They just don't understand what it does. So what are some of the issues that the city council of Crescent Springs faces in particular?
I would say that the city council is not regularly facing giant issues. We don't have a school system that we run. We do have a police department and a fire department. We share it with the neighboring Villa Hills that I mentioned. But it's not like there's regularly, big topics of concern. That being said, they do pop up occasionally. One was and some of these are older issues, but just giving examples, the construction of the new firehouse, which was a very, very expensive project, $10 million plus. I don't think it was supposed to be that much at first, but how these things tend to go. Another one that was more recent was a new neighborhood was being built, kind of behind a few other neighborhoods, and there was concern about, an access road and how much traffic would it cause and emergency vehicles and all that kind of stuff. And even though the issues sort of died down a bit, a lot of people were very unhappy about how it happened. Some people desperately wanted the access road because they felt like the street they happened to live on was getting too much traffic related to the construction. Other people who lived closer to where the access road was supposed to be didn't want it at all because it was going to be right in their backyard. And there were a lot of neighbors whispering and people who were friends on one side of the street or the other, one side of the issue or another, who were not willing to talk openly. And more upsetting about it was, there had been a TIF, taxpayer incentivized financing, when the original neighborhood had been approved by the city council that was supposed to go to this road. And quickly that just went away and the funds were used elsewhere in the city. So, that's an example of an issue too. And this might dovetail into some other things we're going to talk about, that I actually don't have a tremendous dog in the fight on that. I'll say this, one of my neighbors who really wanted the road mentioned to me the safety aspect, and perhaps I was being too libertarian, but I responded to her. I said, I know this sounds ridiculous, but government plays no role in the safety of my children. But in any case, it's an issue where, I think I'm able to look at it with an open mind, not come in with preconceived biases or trying to, give myself an advantage based on where I live specifically. And so, that's just an example of an issue where I think I can take a level-headed approach to it.
Yeah, and I want to swing back to some of this here in a couple of minutes, but before we do that, I do have a lot of listeners that are kind of like libertarian curious, like they know that they lean libertarian, but they don't really know what it means. So I kind of want to get back to the fundamentals. Sure. You are the person that introduced me to the Libertarian Party of Kenton County. I'd registered with the state and had no idea that there was even a Libertarian Party of Kenton County to begin with, but I'm always interested in how people wound up becoming a libertarian. So what's your story? Like, how did you wind up being a libertarian?
It really was two separate ways that happened at the same time. The first one, I won't even get into details on because it's so common. It's Ron Paul. But the second one was more specifically, when I considered myself a Republican, and I'm talking when I was 16, 17 years old. And when President Obama was elected, I knew that he was a, big government liberal and spending. And I started really looking into the details of his budgets and his spending and all that. And I realized that George Bush was spending more. That obviously wasn't true in the last 6 years of Obama's presidency, but for the first 2 years of his presidency, he spent less than Bush did for nearly all of his. And that really got me thinking, got me questioning things. It also led me down the path of Austrian economics. I know we've talked about it, but the book Road to Serfdom was critically important in my libertarian journey. But even taking it a step further, when I looked into Bush's spending and I saw just how much of it was related to the endless wars and all of that, it really put a bug in my ear about how can you support small government if you also support a massive, massive military, a massive, massive police force, a militarized police force. And that's not to come out here and say I'm openly, anti-law enforcement, but, and it was one of the hardest things to really get over. But it strikes me as a juxtaposition to be small government, but also in favor of the arm that enforces all of the government's actions being humongous. So that's really what did it for me.
Right. And then just kind of seeing how that played out throughout the Obama administrations, and then also, Trump and Biden as well. That just kind of crystallizes those views. Yeah,
absolutely. And getting into the more recent situation, I began voting libertarian from the moment that I turned 18. As a matter of fact, my mother and I went to the voting booth during my first election, and we walk in together into separate booths, and then she hears me from across the way say, "Does anybody have a pen?" Because I was writing in a protest vote for Ron Paul. So I've been voting that way the entire time, but I actually didn't join the Libertarian Party or become active in any meaningful way really until lockdowns, until the COVID lockdowns in 2020. And essentially, what I'd say is, I had been voting libertarian, but maybe had some hope still for the Republicans. But seeing how they capitulated so clearly on the lockdowns and the mandates and all that, I think I had the thought the other day, it's like, it's so absurd to me to brag about, oh, my governor ended lockdowns 4 weeks early. It's no. Like they never should have happened in your state. But in any case, one of my big issues, and we probably don't need to get into this with really being part of the LP and joining and doing things for the LP, was abortion. I am a pro-life libertarian. And But when the lockdowns happened, I knew I didn't want to vote Republican. And I started reaching out to some local libertarians. And, the one thing they reminded me of is that, even if a libertarian believes in abortion, they don't believe in taxpayers funding it. And we've seen way too many Republican presidents, governors, what have you, that have just had no issue, just fund it away. So that's what got me involved in the LP in early 2020.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. So you are a libertarian. How would your libertarian principles direct the kinds of votes that you're going to cast while you're in office?
I'll say in three different ways. The first one is obvious. It's taxes and spending. I am opposed to increases in taxes, and really I'm opposed to increase in spending. I mean, I want smart spending. And with me being a CPA and having experience as the chief financial officer, I feel like I can really help with making sure spending is good. Second approach I'll take is something that Justin Amash recently mentioned. And he said that in terms of the U.S. Congress, they spend too much time passing new laws and not enough time repealing bad laws. So part of what I'm going to do that'll be different than anybody else is I'm going to take a look at what we have on the books and say, what do we not need? And the third is very, very specific. There's many different routes we can go, but, things like resolutions to allow urban agriculture, legalizing homemade foods. I mean, any local fans of Thomas Massie, those will be near and dear to their heart. Things related to no-knock warrants that I'm opposed to. Talking about, attendance zones for schools and, making rezoning easier, things like that. We want to make the government work for the people, not be a barrier to whether that's increased happiness or even increased commerce.
Do you know what the political makeup of the city council is right now? Is it mostly conservative? Is it split between progressives and conservatives? How would you describe it?
It's hard to tell. It's technically a nonpartisan race, so it's not like they go out there with their parties. What I would say though is there is a very clear divide. There's a block of 4 neighbors who all live in the same very small apartment complex, and then there's 2 other members they constantly get in arguments with. That being said, there are plenty of unanimous votes and all that. I personally anticipate often being the lone no vote, like Dr. Ron Paul himself. But it's hard to tell. I mean, I think one thing maybe now is as good as ever to get into is sort of the difference between being a libertarian at the local level, versus at the state or federal level. Yeah. And there are things that I would forever and always oppose at the federal or even state level that might be okay at the city and county level. And, so I think there's going to be spending things that I might agree with people on the council with who are not libertarian minded. But the key is going to be make sure that the spending is within reason. I mean, I mentioned the firehouse, which seems to have been a big project that may have spiraled out of control a bit. I think an important, maybe this is getting too theoretical, but an important concept in libertarianism that I've been thinking about is, can you leave or not? Like when you're in the United States, yeah, you could leave, I suppose, if the government made you upset enough. But there's expatriation taxes. There's the, nifty little issue of finding another country to take you in. Whereas in Crescent Springs, I don't feel as bad about some of the taxation and some of the spending, because again, for somebody to move one town over is not a huge burden on their life. And so, while I feel there's going to be ways that I can get along with other members, even if they aren't libertarian in principle, I do feel like I'll be able to add a very unique voice and unique perspective to make sure the city's being managed as well as possible. Yeah.
So how would you as we're talking about this, if you're going to campaign to Democrats, how would you do that? And if you're going to campaign to the Republicans, how would you do that? What would be your approach to those, to both of those groups?
I think to the Republicans, I mentioned some of the issues earlier, as it relates to food freedom and urban agriculture. And of course, the obvious one being, no new taxes. And really my goal is to decrease property taxes. As it relates to talking to Democrats, people that are more progressive, again, no knock warrants are a big one. One conversation I've already had too with the lieutenant in the police department is the question of, how many of the speeding tickets they give, how many of them are for Crescent Springs residents or not? Personally speaking, I understand the premise of safety and all that, but some of these instances of getting pulled over and getting a ticket, don't really seem to be for the common good. They just seem to be for raising money. And it's especially frustrating when it's somebody in your own town getting put over in your own town. You're already paying property taxes there. So, I would say, for that, it's about, ensuring that the police aren't overstepping. I'll say this too. I mean, we're in a heavily Republican area. Thomas Massey's very, very popular here. And, so as it relates to Democrats, there are going to be things that I break ways with the Democrats on, or excuse me, with the Republicans on. And I'm going to be another voice of being independent, providing a different perspective.
Yeah. So the National Libertarian Party has a set of very specific party goals, and they're all, very compatible with kind of the decentralized, like localized way of looking at politics. What were some of the ways that you might help bring about some of those goals at the local level?
Yeah, first thing I would say is localism. I'm a huge proponent, like the National Libertarian Party is, on things being done locally. We've all heard the expression recently of in times of emergency, government will seize power. I like to take the opposite approach. In times of non-emergency is the time for us to provide safeguards. And so my intention, now that things have calmed down from COVID and people aren't hyper-focused on it, is to really put in measures that allow us to control our city if and when some other emergency happens again. I actually addressed the council myself when I asked them. I said, why are there still signs up at our city parks that say, we recommend you wear a mask and all these COVID curfews? And, they say, oh, well, the signs were put there because the state asked us to. I want to put measures in place to ensure that we can control our city if something like that happens, not feel pressured by them. Another thing, of course, is the standard libertarian one, is the non-aggression principle. I do not believe in victimless crimes. I don't believe in the thought police, whether it's wrong think or trying to prevent bad things from happening before they happen. So as much as possible, I'm going to be trying to introduce resolutions and even legislation, if possible, to keep our police officers focused on, protection of life and private property, not focused on whether it's, it's raising money for the city through fees or again, putting people in trouble for nonviolent offenses.
Yeah. Well, I think we are very obviously one of the most libertarian congressional districts in the country. Like you said before, Thomas Massey is, I think, the best libertarian that we have in Congress right now. And Rand Paul is really good in the Senate as well. And so one of the things that I think people that voted for Rand Paul and that people that voted for Thomas Massey ought to know is that they're going to get that same kind of program with you. So from people like that that are interested in liberty and that might be kind of fed up with the two-party system, why should libertarian-oriented people want to join the LP?
I think the greatest proof that the National Republican Party is not serious about standing up to the so-called rhinos happened just earlier today. I saw that the House Freedom Caucus is not even going to put up a speaker candidate against Kevin McCarthy, which, that was their big rallying point in 2015. And I just can't believe it. There are some very good grassroots conservative movements, even here locally, that are serious about, we need to kick these rhinos out, kick out the so-called, what's the Michael Malice expression? Conservatives are just progressives driving the speed limit. And, but I think it's clear at the national level, the Republican Party doesn't care about it. And you know what? For Democrats too, I'm not one to go around complimenting the squad, but I'll never forget I think it was January 20th of 2021, right after January 6th, that it was Rashida Tlaib who came out and she said, sorry, I mispronounced her name, I'm sure, but she came out and said, we cannot let January 6th be an excuse for a further expansion of the Patriot Act. And even the Republicans weren't saying that. So even for the Democrats out there who are very serious about civil liberties, the ones who are fantastic about opposing war, whether that's Ro Khanna in California or even Barbara Boxer, who really hurts to give a compliment to, they have to realize that the Republicans and the Democrats, I sincerely believe that with the exception of domestic policy, domestic social policy, and rhetoric around economics, they are identical. I don't see a difference in financial or in foreign policy. I don't see a difference in monetary policy. When it comes to fiscal policy, they talk different games, but do the same thing. Sure, they might be different on the culture war, but besides that, I just don't see many differences. So I would encourage anybody who's even liberty oriented or even against the lack of transparency and against the the clear nefarious things that are happening behind the scenes, I would encourage them to consider the Libertarian Party.
Yeah, that's great. So you are obviously a member of the Libertarian Party of Kenton County, Kentucky, where we're both from. Talk about the county party, and then what's your role within that county party?
So the county party was refounded in April of 2021. Being the CPA, I got immediately slotted into the treasurer position. But I also, I think I might be the social butterfly, which is probably contradictory for a CPA, of the group. We're getting our sea legs. We've been invited to participate in a number of different events. So Northern Kentucky University invited us to come to their last chance to register events. We'll be at that soon. We were invited out to a sort of, again, replace the Rhinos Freedom Fest event that actually both of Donald Trump's sons spoke at, that we went to, had tremendous success there talking to the attendees. We're in the process of starting a Defend the Guard Kentucky movement. So we're trying to, figure out the best way to impact the community. My perspective as it relates to, where should the Libertarian Party focus their energy? It's a lot of people will say local versus national. I think it's local and national. That sounds like a cop-out, but what I mean more specifically is that we have to run a presidential and a vice presidential candidate. Why would we not? The attention, the media attention and everything is less than it should be, but still valuable airtime. But I actually think it's the statewide campaigns that tend to be the ones that overconsume resources. Races for U.S. Senate, races for governor. The number of signatures that you need to get on the ballot is just insurmountable in many cases. Kentucky is a little bit easier than most, but still, it's a ton of work. And while those campaigns can have some success, I'm just not sure the resources that are justified or resources used by them are justified. Some of the approach, it's hyper-local and it's national. The other thing I'll say about the Libertarian Party of Kenton County, and I sort of alluded to this earlier about, when times are calm is the time to be working hardest. When the Joe Jorgensen campaign was happening, which again, I started getting involved towards the middle or end of that, you could just tell that, the people that were really involved in Kentucky helping her campaign out were exhausted. And I'm not holding that against them. I mean, there were just, too few hands to take in the harvest. So my perspective when I joined was, I'm not going to wait until we get closer to 2024 to help locally build a ground game. I'm going to do it now so that when that time comes, we're ready to rock. And even more specifically, I don't know if you would agree with this, but I like to think that once people start coming to our meetings and start joining events, I don't try to pressure them into doing too much or taking on roles. I can be a little bit obnoxious and a little bit, not aggressive, but frequent in reaching out. But I plan to really lay it on them as we get closer to 2024 to really get involved with trying to get the name out there at Libertarian Party.
Yeah. So before we talk about some of the Libertarian Party events, what would you recommend for somebody that's interested in libertarianism but has no idea what it is? Like, what are some resources that those people could use if they wanted to know more about what libertarianism means?
There's many different routes you could go with this. I think, obviously there's a whole host of libertarian literature. I think one of the greatest books that I've read to that effect is The Law by Friedrich Bastiat, who was an 18th century French economist, but he wrote in a very, very accessible way. It's not a hyper-political, hyper-libertarian book, but it just discusses the nature of taxation, the nature of government, the nature of the law. He was an economic journalist, so he wasn't a pure economist. So a very, very personable way to approach things. You're a shining example. You can't be a libertarian without a podcast. So people listening to this podcast is great. An underrated podcast would be the Human Action podcast that Jeff Deist of the Mises Institute does, and the Reason Roundtable is sort of a different flavor, but a very accessible format as well. So, the thing about libertarianism and the Libertarian Party is obviously there's way too much focus on the internal differences between factions of libertarians. But the reality is that in order for liberty in this country to really make a foothold, there has to be some coalition buildings. We have to learn to, not focus on our differences and focus more on the problems that we all agree are being caused by the state. And so, I think it's different for every person. You have to figure out what your pet issue is. Maybe your pet issue and your big focus is foreign policy. Obviously, Scott Horton and all of his things at antiwar.com are a great place to start. But while you and I probably sit here and would agree that economics has to be the center of it, or should be, there's many people that have come to the movement another way. And so I encourage people to consider what's important to them, consider where the Republicans and Democrats are failing them on that, and look into it. It's easy to find. And I would say, too, we're going to post my information. Send me a note. Happy to talk to anybody.
Yeah. So obviously contacting you, but how else can people get connected with the party?
So I'd encourage you to follow us on Twitter, LP Kenton County. We also, of course, email kenton@lpky.org, and just go to lpky.org's website. I really love our platform. I think that it's done. We made some changes to it. The most recent state convention back in the spring. I love what we did on education in particular, and it really tries to be show libertarian principles without being exclusionary of certain types of libertarians. It is a broad movement already, even with the infighting. There really are a big diversity of opinions. And so, I would encourage people to, look into lpky.org.
Yeah. So if you're in the area and you want to join up and meet some people and talk to some people, what are some of the upcoming events that we have?
So the Libertarian Party of Kenton County, we meet on the third Thursday of every month at Pee Wee's, 6:30 p.m. around there. Oftentimes we're in the back room and we have a big enough crowd. I mentioned earlier, October 11th, Libertarian Party of Kenton County, as well as our sister county in Campbell County, will be at Northern Kentucky University for their last chance to register event. And then even before that, on October 10th, on Columbus Day, we're going to do an event with the Hamilton County Libertarian Party at Humble Monk Brewing, which is in Northside, very close to the very famous Urban Artifact Brewing. But Humble Monk makes some tremendous Belgian beers, and I would encourage everybody to come out. And talk about diversity of opinion. Hamilton County Libertarian Party is different in their approach and perspective from the Libertarian Party of Kenton County, and that's okay. We like to approach things from all angles.
Yeah, and it's just a lot of fun hanging out and talking with everyone too. Like, I've had a really great time at these events, and I've been doing it for I don't know, 8 or 9 months now, and it's been incredible. So I very much encourage you, if you are in the area, to come and check us out. So Bill, go ahead and give us the final sales pitch here. Why should residents of Crescent Springs vote for you?
I have a unique approach to any task that I take on, and it's that I'm a very opinionated person. But I don't believe in just sharing my opinions and then expecting somebody else to implement them. So I plan to be both a thinker and a doer. And what I mean by that is, while I have unique principles, unique perspectives, really specific things that I want to do, it's not helping anybody if I'm just there for my own ideas. And so my plan is to be incredibly transparent. I want my phone number and my email posted everywhere. I almost have thought about like a college professor doing office hours, reserving time every week, saying anybody can sign up and call me, or I'll be on my Zoom link. But I really want to be there for the other residents of Crescent Springs. I know the prior council has had issues with that. As a matter of fact, they even started a transparency and accountability subcommittee. And every time I drive by the city building, it says Transparency and Accountability Subcommittee meeting canceled for lack of business, which is astounding to me. But, it's 2022. There has to be more than an email address hidden on a website. So I plan to be very, very transparent, and I plan to be accountable to the people. And again, I'm going to be an independent, unique voice that brings both principles that may not have been seen before in the council, as well as skills. When it's my financial skills, my project leadership background, I plan to really move things forward and keep us focused on the big picture items.
All right, perfect. Well, Bill, thank you so much for coming on. If you live in Crescent Springs, you need to vote for Bill. He's a great guy. Love hanging out with him once a month, or even sometimes more than once a month, and join, or at least come to some of the Libertarian Party events. Bill, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me. My first podcast interview ever. I had a blast.
You did a great job, too. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Protestant Libertarian Podcast. If you have any questions or comments or thoughts about the show, please reach out to me at theprotestantlibertarian@gmail.com. You can also follow me on Twitter @ProLibertyPod. Again, you can follow me on Twitter @ProLibertyPod. You can also support the show by leaving a rating or a review on your favorite podcast app. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.